Greetings. I'm Carl Nightingale. Urban History in Earth Time is a recorded lecture in 6 video episodes whose goal is to offer some broad context for discussions among urban historians on how to engage the ongoing debate about the Anthropocene and how to practically position our field to face the predicaments of our own time. This first segment offers an introduction to the others. I originally delivered this lecture as a keynote address to the European Association for Urban History in the remarkable city of Ostrava, Czechia, in early September 2024. I thank the lead organizers of the conference, Andrea Pokludova and Michaela Zawodna, as well as Professor Christian Bernhard of the Humboldt University in Berlin, and the entire International Committee of the EAUH for the opportunity to present these thoughts. This 6-part recorded version expands the lecture in some places to elaborate some of the points I made at the conference. It also contains clarifying examples I did not have time to present in the original. A list of citations and further readings is available for screenshotting at the end of segment 6, as well as a glossary of the theoretical terms I used in the lecture. My first clarifying example is the city of Ostrava itself. It is known as a city built literally upon coal, the shallow deposits of fossil sunshine that gave rise to the huge Moravian Silesian industrial complex that straddles the border of Czechia and Poland. As such, it is a quintessential example of what I call cities of hydrocarbon, a concept I'll clarify later in this lecture. But as the historian of Ostrava, Martin Jamelka, movingly reminded us in another keynote address at the conference, long before Ostrava was a coal city, it was a city born of rivers, the child of an equally large zone of watersheds and wetlands that lies up on top of the region's coal seams. The theme was dramatically underscored at the conference by a 4-hand piano performance of Bedřich Smetana's The Moldau, a own poem meant to represent the river that flows through the Czech capital, Prague. Not a week passed after the conference before something even more dramatic happened. Superstorm Boris, the child of the Promethean power humans have harnessed in hydrocarbon cities, as well as the greenhouse gases we have emitted from them over the past 2.5 centuries, pounded Ostrava and much of Central Europe with rain, filling rivers and wetlands beyond their banks, submerging large parts of Ostrava and many other cities in the region in water, leaving countless urban structures damaged, tens of thousands stranded, and dozens dead. This story, whose plot turns on sources of natural energy that gave birth to cities and to human power that now threatens the existence of cities, is a story that frames with terrifying clarity what I have to say next about cities and Earth time and cities and the Anthropocene. The debate over the Anthropocene, even before we add urban history to it, has been at once fierce and ironic. It is fierce in that it has uniquely engaged antagonistic passions across a vast array of fields, from the natural sciences to the social sciences to the humanities. It is ironic because this fierce debate is about the name for something that nearly 100% of scholars agree exists, namely a series of predicaments that have risen because our species has gained as much power as geophysical and other biological forces in determining the fate of our home planet. Among these, humans' impact on geophysical phenomena, what we know as global warming, is best known. We're beginning also to talk about our impact on biological change, known by such terms as biodiversity loss, or, more extremely, the sixth extinction. Disruptions of Earth's chemical content through thousands of new toxical chemicals of our own making and disruptions of our home planet's production of nitrogen, potassium, and ozone also matter as well. So does the temperature, salinity, and acidity of the oceans. So do our vast encroachments on land everywhere. The fossil record and any urban rubble we leave behind during our lifetimes will be strikingly different and more extensive than any before. All of this we know and believe. For the most part, the debate over the Anthropocene is over the name, not the named. The Anthropocene conversation really hangs on 3 axes. First, there are questions of human power. What is it, how we produce it, how we amplify it, and how we wield or deploy it? Much of the critique of the name Anthropocene starts with the idea that the general term anthropos obscures the obscene inequalities in the human power that created the predicaments of our time. All the best quantitative data confirms that a very small group of anthropoi are far, far more responsible for these crises than the vast majority of us. We know who the tiny class of planetary Uber exploiters are: ultra-powerful imperial states and global capitalist corporations, particularly those involved in hydrocarbon extraction, but also the financiers, industrialists, and real estate capitalists who enable these activities, as well as the propaganda mills that spout so-called climate denialism, rank nonsense that flies in the face of one of the few things scholars most agree upon in the world right now. Meanwhile, most of us, and especially the poorest of us on Earth, will face far worse consequences from our current predicaments than the prime Earth despoilers will. Most of us have done far less to bring the so-called Anthropocene on. Indeed, many of us behave collectively in ways that are actually most likely to prevent the direst futures many predict. The second axis of analysis in the Anthropocene debate is space. The planet is the principal space at issue, of course, but cities have entered quite prominently into the debate too, if a bit ambiguously. For some, the widely ballyhooed news that most of humanity now lives in cities means that anything named after Anthropos must have to do with the urban. Others more specifically accuse cities of a wide variety of crimes against nature, from producing the vast majority of greenhouse gases to putting more people at risk of sea level rise, storms, and planetary heating, to killing 1 billion birds every year due to collisions with buildings. More generally, cities have an old reputation as being the ultimate artificial, even anti-natural space, despite the efforts of urban environmental historians to debunk this dichotomous form of reasoning. There is nature in the city, they remind us. Cities exist in nature. Cities exist at the mercy of nature, and in fact, when it all comes down to it, cities are nature because they are our habitat and we are part of nature. Indeed, cities are often seen as the best solution to the natural predicaments we have caused. I hope to offer a slightly different approach to all of these thoughts by showing how the history of the production of human space, cities and urban spaces above all, is intrinsic to the history of the production of human power. Third, and most important to the overall theme of this lecture, there's the matter of time. When did this predicament, or these predicaments, begin? In the end, disagreements about this periodization question within the field of geology sank the first concerted effort to officially give the name Anthropocene to a new 37th epoch in the geological timescale. A majority of geologists on a key committee did not feel comfortable with the proposal from another key committee to assign 1950 as a date at which human power superseded that of geophysical and other biological forces. What about 1870 or 1780 or 10,000 BCE, they asked. Urban historians have some things to say about those dates, of course. I will say a bunch about them, as my title suggests, but change over time is much more complicated than any one or several dates. Both Earth time and urban history are notoriously twitchy and contingent. The shape of both these forms of time depends on so many factors and moving parts acting at the same time that they produce surprises all the time. Anything we say about urban history and Earth time must line the two up in parallel and ask whether, amidst all the twitchy changes, we can distinguish deeper, more stately patterns of change that are worth noting as well. In these larger pulses of Earth and urban time, I argue, we can find a very wide-ranging, very old relationship indeed. However we name it, the predicament we face today and the questions that have already arisen about it give urban historians new reasons to do what we do. If the human predicament is a planetary predicament, it is also an urban predicament, and thus faces urban historians with a disciplinary predicament. As scholars whose primary source material often demands that we focus on small spaces and small increments of time in the past, how are we to think about something that's so big as Earth and so long as Earth time, which thus far is only discernible in natural archives, subject only to methods of natural scientists? How should scholars of the past deal with a question that in many scholarly circles, and certainly in the public mind, mostly focuses on the present and the future? What follows is my preliminary answer. I have no doubt that there are many ways to think about urban history in terms of Earth time. This is just one way, and I welcome suggestions for many other ways. This version of a preliminary answer emerged as an extended intellectual experiment that started while I was writing Earthopolis, a biography of our urban planet 2022, and kept going as a part of a number of events and publications associated with the Global Urban History Project, including my own new short book, Our Urban Planet and Theory and History 2024. It overlaps with and is inspired by the work of Dagmar de Groot and his multidisciplinary team, as well as work of global or big historians, Peter Frankopan, John McNeill, and John Brooke, as well as a growing commitment among urban archaeologists who bring natural scientific data to bear on what they find in urban ruins. It is also deeply informed by conversations conducted under GUP auspices with historian Julia Adnay Thomas, who has forged a model intellectual relationship with geologists Mark Williams and Jan Zalazewicz, members of the committee that built the case for 1950 as the beginning of the Anthropocene, and who will no doubt continue to press this point going forward. I rely on Professor Thomas for the insight that the Anthropocene, or whatever we call it, is a predicament, not merely a crisis. As far as method goes, this intellectual experiment is, first of all, synthetic, based on systematic reading of secondary material in many fields, including my own subfield of global urban history. It is multidisciplinary in that it makes a few tentative steps along a path that archaeologists and other urban studies scholars have already followed, much more enthusiastically than urban historians thus far, towards the work of natural scientists, primarily paleoclimatologists. It is also theoretical in that it is based on what we might call the tertiary archive of urban theorists, especially those who call themselves planetary urbanization theorists and urban political ecologists. Practitioners operating within both of these theoretical projects do not typically engage in systematic readings of urban historians, but at key moments in their theorizing, they repeatedly refer to something they call the historical, to explain things about cities that they can't explain with theory alone. The version I'll present today, spread over the 6 episodes, has 3 main chapters. Chapter 1, next up in the succession of episodes, is entitled Power, Energy In, Power Out. I conceive of power in terms of human acts of harvesting inward flows of geosolar energy and reprocessing it, in our space and our history, as a collective yet unequal capacity to change both space and time. Human power. Understood as power-producing spaces, I argue that cities should be thought of in terms of an updated version of the ancient Greek concept of a polis, a designation that emphasizes cities as the premier form of space for deployment of the most potent forms of human power. Chapter 2 is entitled Space, How the Urban Became Planetary. How does the production of cities, and urban spaces more generally, actually produce power? I argue that our expanded definition of polis requires us to update and to stretch our definition of cities and urban spaces in terms of their role in the concentration of energy, in the production of human power, and also the amplification and deployment of human power. As the premier location of the polis, cities must remain at the center of the definition of urban space. They remain central to the urban condition that has in turn become central to the human predicament today. But cities only exist in relationship to urban hinterlands, that is, spaces that make cities possible through inflows of geosolar energy, and what I'm going to call urban forelands, spaces that cities make possible through outflows of human power. Add these 3 spaces, cities plus urban hinterlands plus urban forelands together, and at different times, the urban condition took on planetary dimensions. We twinned Earth with our urban planet, a phenomenon I nicknamed Earth-O-Polis or Earthopolis. With these concepts of power and space in hand, we can then explore the third and principal dimension of our story, time. This lecture's main goal is to suggest ways to think about how 6,000 years of urban history meshed with the 4.5 billion year span of Earth time, accounting for the sheer twitchiness of both forms of time, yet also discerning the longer, lower frequency drum beats in time that were produced by the intersections of the urban and Earth as co-producers, amplifiers, and deployers of power and space. At first, urban history mostly followed the lead of Earth time, but then, as various parts of our urban planet, Earthopolis, came into being at various key moments, urban history began to govern Earth time in radically new ways, notably within our lifetimes. Along the way, the predicaments we face today took shape, grew, and grew in menace. Okay, those are some introductory thoughts. To follow these lines of thought further, please turn to the next video episode in the series entitled Chapter 1, Power, Energy In, Power Out.